Hello and welcome to the podcast where I explore the world of audio storytelling and particular actual plays and audio dramas. And I'm particularly fascinated with tabletop role-playing games. And in particular, that gives me the delight to be joined by Mr. Island. Tell us, Island, about yourself and what you do.
Hi, I'm Island. I run a show called In and Out of Character, a role players podcast where I talk to role players from all over the world. I know that this is a tabletop podcast, but I talk to tabletop creators, people who just like to play tabletops. I talk to people who like to role play in MMOs, VR role playing, LARPing, stuff like that. I just find role playing to be really fascinating and fun. Still, it helps me keep that childhood aspect and that childhood wonder still alive in myself. So I love it and I enjoy talking to people about it. I'm kind of a geek in general, just about role playing.
I'm entirely with you. I mean, I started out with D&D, as I've mentioned before, when I was 10, playing the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I think we had like a white folder or something like that. I can't remember. It's such a long time ago. But I was also one of the earlier players on some of the earliest online games. Back in 1984, I was playing a thing called Shades, which was a multi-user dungeon using a 96 baud modem where you were typing what your instructions in the game. You can imagine what the lag was like back in the day. So yeah, so I've been there, done that, played EverQuest, Original 59, all those kind of original early starters, and I work in the games industry, so I'm obviously very, very connected to the kinds of experiences you're describing. I mean, you just look at Jagex and you look at kind of RuneScape and the passion of people. Obviously, not everyone is role playing. In fact, maybe at some point in this, we'll get into what is role-playing in a computer game, but that's probably not really the intent of this podcast because I want to talk about audio drama and storytelling.
Right.
So let's go back. I've explained what got me into the kind of like tabletop style role-playing game, and I've obviously hinted at the fact I've dabbled in the video game versions of these things. But what got you, into this whole kind of scene, and what lit the fire for you? So what got you into this kind of experience? What was the triggering moment that said, role playing is something that really matters to you?
So, not to make it sound sad or depressing or like that, I really like to be a part of communities. I like to make friends. I like to meet people. And I just have a fascination with storytelling in general. I was that kid who enjoyed being like, telling spooky stories with her friends and coming up with stuff like that. And when I found out that there was something that allowed for a more, how do I say this, like a coherent experience, then I jumped head in first. Like I just went straight into it. I loved role playing with some friends I met at a store. And because I enjoyed that storytelling aspect so much, I went from immediately the tabletop. I think we were playing 2.0 at the time. And I immediately went from that to role playing in World of Warcraft and MMO role playing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I actually decided after 3 months of playing the beta of World of Warcraft that I had to stop because I would get divorced if I carried on. And that was which has happened. I actually have some friends of ours who both got divorced and then married another player in World of Warcraft. So, and role-playing is an absolutely important part of what they were doing. And I think what's interesting to me is that in this podcast, we've talked to people who are actually writing audio narratives, proper kind of like storytelling with acting and sound design, all the way through to kind of improvisation and actual play, tabletop type games. But we're kind of going a little bit further down the line here. We're talking about the role that story plays for us as the participant, how we take an experience like a game and we absorb ourselves in the flow of that and add layers of our own narrative, our own personal engagement. And in particular, I think the catalyst, like you said, is this wanting to connect with other people. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's exactly what I think role playing is. Like solo role playing, while it's not entirely new, is like more of a thing that has just started to kind of have a resurgence to it. But mostly role playing is as I tell everybody, a collaborative experience.
Yeah.
In MMOs, you have guilds with leadership and other people that you role play with, and forum type stuff. You have all the other people in the forum who you tell the story with. Same thing at the table. You have the 4 or 5, sometimes way more than that, other people who you sit down and say, "Hey, I have this character and I really want to experience this character with you." It's just, I find it fantastic.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think there's the freedom that it gives you at the same time as you. I think part of what I think is interesting about game design is the use of constraint to be able to create framing. If we create a game where you can do something but there's no consequence, then you don't have any kind of engagement with the game. It's not meaningful. And I think with role playing, we're actually creating our own constraints because we're saying it matters what this player, this character experiences, and how they respond is going to be according to a set of constrained rules that I'm applying to myself. That would the character do that is a kind of rule. Would the character respond in that way? What's their history? These are all kind of the foundation stones for storytelling. But I think they're also playful in this way of adding layers of meaning and connection. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. So in the world of, how do I put this? In the world of tabletops, you can look each other in the face and have these discussions like you and I are doing right now. But in the world of MMOs, you sometimes don't ever know the other person on the other side of the screen. Like you might never talk to them out of character. Personally, I try to talk to people out of character because I like to get to know them. I like to just have that sort of connection. But when it comes to how we keep ourselves in check, at the table, we can say, "Hey, was this too much?" or "Hey, is this," et cetera, so forth. When it comes to MMOs, everyone has this sort of general, like, this is the cap, or like, this is where it should be. And sometimes players go way over that, and sometimes players go way under that. Like, you have I'm sure you've heard the whole adage of uh, not playing a Mary Sue, or not playing Arthas's long lost son who was a half-breed with Sylvanas or whatever. Like, sometimes that does happen. That is not a joke. That is actually something that does happen every now and again.
Of course it does.
But it's very rare. I do want everyone to know that. It's incredibly rare. But normally people are like, I want to play a believable character. And sometimes, the power creep goes up above that. Sometimes it goes below that.
Well, like I say, how many people want to play a poor farm boy that loses their aunt and uncle to some imperial knights and turns out that they're actually the descendant of a wizard who's actually the bad guy in the story? I mean, let's face it, it is a trope, and it's very easy for us to follow tropes because they're familiar, they're comfortable, they're like wearing an old pair of shoes. But it's also cliche, and I think this is one of the challenges of personal-led storytelling, is you kind of don't have to worry about the cliche. It's a bit like fan fiction. In some ways, the cliche is kind of part of the fun of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I have a few characters, and like, how do I put this? I have a character who is a villain, but he's the stereotypical Saturday cartoon villain. And the whole point of his character is just to kind of bring out a sort of silliness for the other characters. Like, while not being like super incredible silly, where it's like unbelievable or something like that, but they can at least respond to it and be like, well, if this lunatic who thinks that he can take over the city with a bunch of rats is actually trying to do that, how are we going to I get what you're saying. Cliches they're fun.
They're fun, and sometimes they're the point of the comedy of the process if you really lean in on it. Part of the reason why I'm saying that is because one of the things I think is really interesting is the number of players who explore role playing in its various forms, like you say, inside a World of Warcraft or a tabletop role playing game, but actually end up wanting to write stories. And I find for me, it's a combination of it's the experimentation. It's your chance to play and explore dialogue. And if there's another person, you get a feedback loop, you get a learning curve. And I think it's joyful in its own right, and that should be that is enough. But I think it's also really interesting as a fuel for testing and trying out your dialogue and trying out your experiences. And, avoiding the, what was the thing that Harrison Ford said about Spielberg's script? It's all right for you to write it, but no one actually talks like that. I think for me, And I think it's an interesting foundation ground for trying things out. But of course, it has its pitfalls. So you're clearly fascinated by this space and in all its factions. And you've interviewed a number of people for your podcast in terms of things. Whilst you're here, don't forget to check out our actual play, The Anything Could Happen show on YouTube and all good podcast sites, where I put my guest players through no-win scenarios with limited information and always against the clock. And of course, where anything could happen.
It is worth noting that there are dozens of reasons a planet could be declared uninhabitable. It's not just air composition. There could be contaminants in the soil, in the water. There could be any number of reasons that a colony like this would be abandoned. And sometimes the reason that data is kept under lock and key is to make sure that people like us don't disturb what is lurking underneath, which is, of course, my job here. I just do want to call our attention to that to make sure that, if we need to cut and go in a dangerous situation, that we are, following procedures and making sure that we're not releasing anything from this colony potentially out into other spaces and colonies in the area.
That's fair. Thank you, Neil. Fair enough.
What would you say is there a common thread between the different types of players that you think really sparks out? Or, let's start with a common thread. We'll explore the differences later.
So I haven't had a chance to talk to VR role players yet. I actually have one coming up here in a couple of days.
Okay.
And I also haven't had a chance to talk to people who like to go off and do other types of vocal role playing, besides for the tabletop community, because, you have to role play by vocal.
Exactly.
I have a hard time talking to people on a screen for some reason. I have no idea why it is. A common fascination between all the players is there is a sense of wanting to explore something beyond themselves, if that makes any sense. There is a gosh, how do I put this? When people sit down and they say, hey, I really want to get serious about like role playing, or I really want to get into this or that, it's normally because they have this idea for a person in their head that they want to explore. And I just super encourage it for people to do this, because it is a good idea to get out of yourself and experience things from another point of view.
100%. 100%.
And you can do it in a fun way through like fantasy and sci-fi and skullduggery, if you like. I mean, there's so many settings and universes out there that you can do this. But generally speaking, when people, no matter if you're in VR or tabletops or MMOs or whatever, it all comes down to, I have this idea and I want to explore this idea. I want to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. I think it goes deeper than that. I think, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that, there are different motivations for doing it. I think there is a subsection of people who have a sense of lack of self and they want to explore that about themselves. And I think that is a perfectly valid, legitimate, and often we see people in the tabletop community especially, but in general, particularly I think in online games where there's an anonymity to it, where people can wear that other person's shoes and see if that fits them. I think that's valid. And I'm not just talking about LGBTQ issues. I'm talking about just general sense of like my sense of who I am. Particularly, I think if you've come from a isolated context, social context, I think that's fairly common. I think there's also, like you're describing, people who are narratively or theatrically interested or inclined, and they want to try these ideas of the other, of who could that character be? How do I try out that experience? What would it be like to see it from those other people's eyes? And I think that as well, massively interesting and valid. I think there is the third. I don't know. My guess is that the third type I'm thinking of is probably the rarest. Want to actively challenge their bubble, and they want to sit in a function they would not be, deliberately would not be. And I don't mean that just as an exploring a personality. Quite opposite, who are there to specifically provoke, and not just themselves, but sometimes others. I have a friend of mine who he took this to a little bit of an extreme, where he was almost obnoxious in the way that he would roll his characters, despite being a very delightful person. And so it can go wrong, just being honest. However, I think it's still a really interesting thing to actually play something which is completely against your sense of self and what you want to be. And I think understanding that there are these different motivations to how people approach role playing I think makes it really interesting to try and work out what's going on. Does that resonate with you? Does that make sense to you?
To be honest, I've actually never considered that third option before because not oftentimes, like you said, not often, but it does happen where people will make a character to challenge themselves in their bubble. But it's not something that happens so much. And I think more people should do that. I have characters that have different beliefs than me for certain. Like I have everybody has, I say everybody, maybe not everybody, but people have their bad characters, they have their asshole characters and stuff like that. And to be honest with you, like I have had characters where I've done something in a scene with, and of course, consent with the other people that you're playing with, just to make sure that everyone's on the same vibe. But I have had my characters do things and I'm just like, wow, God, that was terrible. I hated that. No.
Itchy kind of like creepy feeling. I just did that.
Yeah, like it sometimes this does happen. Again, not very often, but it does happen where you have a scene and you have to like talk to your friends afterwards. And you have to be like, hey, that was kind of intense. Are we okay? Is everything okay? Like nothing's wrong. I just want to, make sure that everything was, you want to be above the board. And that, I guess that leads all back to communication, but I get what you're saying about like the whole third option. The second option, which was if I can recall correctly, is the idea that you're exploring things about yourself. It is something I myself have done. And again, I implore other people to do because there is a freedom in allowing yourself to explore more about yourself in various ways, if that makes any sense.
That was the first option, but the idea that you're really trying to understand. I think maybe I'm misremembering what order I said it in, but anyway, obviously one of the options is I'm trying to find out something about who I am through the active role playing, versus I'm trying to tell a story through the way I play a character, or I explore what stories could happen if I took that perspective, as opposed to deliberately trying to be a provocateur, for want of a better phrase. I may have fluffed the way of describing it, but I think there's something really fascinating. I mean, I've done a whole bunch of games with various people from all over places. I referee D&D for people quite often, but it's interesting. Quite often, somebody or more than one person in the group who are deliberately playing characters that are not the way they are perceived, but are much more about the way they feel. And I think that makes me happy, that I'm giving them space to be who they feel they are. That being said, I'm terrible at doing the characters who are not like me. If you have a game where I'm not taking the lead, I try really hard not to take the lead. But if nobody steps up, I can't help myself. So that's really bad. I can't create a role which doesn't have that natural kind of element of desire to drive things forward. But I'm also terrible at, I can't play selfish. Well, I can be selfish, but I can't play characters that are deliberately selfish. I find that really hard.
Yeah, so this is actually something else I've found pretty common along like all the boards, where people have a certain aspect of themselves that they find very hard to break away from. Currently in my life, I am a father, and I am happily a father, and I love my son, and I have taken on this nurturing role in my 30s. It has just happened, but I try my best to help everybody I come across. I try my best to, if I mess something up, I do my best to fix it and resolve the issues and so on and so forth. Now all of my characters do that, and I find it so hard to play a selfless character. It really is kind of difficult for me, because I have tried. Like again, I have a villain character, but even they try to fix shit when. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can curse in this book.
Yeah, that's fine. I will get into offline. We'll talk all about the UK Online Safety Act and how it's stuffing up everything. But that's
everything. But it's one of those aspects where it is again okay to stick into that mold. I have characters I enjoy more than others. Like right now, I have a character who is very elegant in their wording. They are very they try to be calm and precise, and they're kind of flowery in how they approach people. And I like characters like that. But on the offhand, like the whole rugged speech slurred down to where it's like you're mixing like 3 or 4 words together, sort of characters. Those are difficult for me in a sense because I just you get those from a culture, right? And I haven't ever experienced that culture, and it's hard for me to get into that culture. If that makes any sense. And
but then you can go a whole other area if you start talking about culture, can't you? Because then we're into an area of like, what are appropriate limits to that? So I'm refereeing a game which happens to have a bunch of LGBTQ folks. I'm an ally. I'm happen to be a cis white guy, but a het guy. But obviously, I'm playing characters that are not my identity, and I think that's okay and appropriate. And I'm doing that with people with their consent and blah 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 blah. But I can't help but feeling a little bit kind of nervous about it, and it's because I'm sensitive and don't want to overstep the mark, and I want to be playful in that space and appropriate, but finding the balancing act for what is culturally appropriate, I think, is a really tricky thing to work out. I mean, am I being oversensitive? I know I am, but do you have any thoughts on kind of like how you deal with that kind of cultural question?
So it's hard to. It sort of depends on like which aspect you're talking about, right? Because like if it's fantasy culture, then there's not really much you can do to mess that up. You know what I mean? But if it's not fantasy culture, like if we take a game like any game that is set in our modern day world, right, whether it be fantastical or otherwise, will have a certain expectation of culture to it. But like in Final Fantasy, you have all these different characters, and you can stick to those characters' cultures, or you can move away from those character cultures, and no one's going to bat an eye at you one way or another, except for in like certain aspects. Like I could give you a long example, but
I'll give you my thinking. The example that comes to my mind would be to have a Call of Cthulhu game that features the Tulsa Race Massacre.
The what now?
Tulsa Massacre. So basically there was a white supremacist attack on the Greenwood district in Tulsa in 1921. I've got a friend of mine who would love to incorporate that kind of thing in a Call of Cthulhu narrative arc, because you can imagine creating this juxtaposition with real history where bad things happened and, horror history. There's a really narrative, interesting resonance there. But you're conflicting. You're in an area where you're starting to create quite challenging. As a white guy, that's a challenging thing, especially a Brit, because that's not it's not my story. Or that maybe that gives me permission. I don't know. Okay, I'm asking the question deliberately to be kind of broaden it out.
Yeah. So like let's take something that you and I can both kind of like touch base on, which is like the Boston Tea Party, right? The Boston Tea Party is something that happened between both of our countries. And absolutely. We could absolutely build something around that. Now, I don't know how that is perceived over there in the UK. I know how it's perceived over here in America, which is the most American, way. America, fuck yeah, boom, boom, boom. We celebrate it every year.
We don't care. It's like, you spilled some tea. You're one of many colonies. You're just one of their colonies. It's fine.
Yeah. So
actually, there's a whole bunch of fun things around that, because there's a whole bunch of Brits who like to joke that it was the Germans that lost the American Revolutionary War, not the British, because it was the German mercenaries who failed to win, and it was British people who won.
Yeah.
Because you were all British at the time.
So we can take that aspect, and like you and I can sit down and be like, hey, this is something that we would like to explore in a story. Or like I, as your GM, could be like, hey, this is something I really want to do. Is there a reason why you feel like we shouldn't? And if we can, are there aspects of it that we need to talk about first before we go into this? Like, I think it's more about doing the moment in question, whether it is the Boston Tea Party or something like that. We need to do it justice, right?
Yes.
Like we need to do it justice by the players, and that's in itself also a hard topic to broach, because it's like, what does that mean to the individual? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you and I, we have different points of views on this one specific thing. How am I, as a GM, going to do justice to you by that means. And
Yeah.
it can get into like some really murky waters, but you know, role playing is all about the collaborative storytelling and the collaborative experience. And communication is a big key part of that. So I would, you know, we'd have to sit down and have like that session 0 conversation about it.
Exactly. And I think that's that we're getting into kind of the real meat of it, which is to do it authentically, you know, from a place, a shared place of starting. I think that really matters. And, you know, it's always helpful to have a MacGuffin of some kind, which allows you to separate out the real world process from the game experience. That's what you're saying about, you know, in a fantasy world, that's a kind of MacGuffin for giving you that separation from reality. So we're not seen as going too far. But I think, like you say, communication, setting out the rules, setting out what people are comfortable and happy with, being able to have ways of you know, safe words or phrases, the X card. There are numerous tools and techniques that have been developed since basically back in the 90s when we were doing game conventions with games like this. You know, we had a safe word at that time. Nowadays, you'll have the X or you'll have thing. Just a set of arrangements in tabletop in particular where people say, I don't have to explain, but I'm not comfortable.
Right. Yeah.
Let's
and I
move
think
on.
I think that is actually important. I think people should have the right to be like, hey, this is not kosher to me. I'm like, we need to either move past this or I need to like step away. And like, honestly, at that point, there needs to be like no hard feelings because I do not like it in any form of media when kids get hurt. I just can't. Like, there are people I enjoy a lot who I like watching and listening to, and kids come up. And at that point, I have to be like, okay, do I risk keep listening to this? Do I risk keep playing this role, or do I just keep moving on? Like, I was listening to one of my favorite creators. His name is Papa Meat. Don't laugh at me. And he was talking about pranks going wrong, and the topic of kids came up because kids like to do pranks, and I have to make that decision of, do I keep listening to this episode or do I just move on and forget this happened?
It's a toughie. I'll give you an example. My son's a major film person, loves horror films, loves action films, cannot watch John Wick.
Yeah. Is it because of the dog?
The dog.
Yep. No, I get that.
Cannot, literally will not watch it regardless, even though he would love it. Apart from that moment. But you can't not have a John Wick without that moment. And I think this is kind of what we're skirting around is that we want to explore stories, and sometimes those stories have complicated and challenging elements within them. And what we have to decide as part of the collection that's doing that and experiencing that is what is okay. And I think doing that authentically and really with some self-awareness is massively important. The trouble is the Dunning-Kruger problem. So Dunning-Kruger is a kind of thought experiment. Well, it's a principle, basically. The less we know about something, the more we think we know.
Right.
And the more we know about something, the more we know there is more to know than we know. And therefore we think we know less than we do. And that, I think, we cannot, any complicated and challenging story, any complicated character process will have these more human questions in them. And I think we have to be aware of them and have sensitivity to them. The characters that any human story, any character story has these complications, and it's important we look at them sensitively, authentically, but also aware of the limitations we have in telling them. But I don't think we should necessarily shy away from telling hard stories. We just have to tell them in ways that are authentic. So you've interviewed a whole bunch of people. You've talked about some of the commonalities. What are some of the standout sort of things that you've loved about talking to people doing these kind of activities?
So one of the things I love a lot about role playing is the part that has nothing to do with role playing at all. And let me explain this. I have people who've come on, right, and who have talked to me about getting into things because they had a character who did it, if that makes any sense. An example of this is like I've had someone come on who has talked about getting into music because their character got into music, because their character is a musician and they wanted to know how to role play their character better, and that led them down a role, and then they found out that they love actually doing music. And I think that is so fascinating and genuinely awesome. Like, people who get into other hobbies specifically because they were able to explore that hobby through a means of their own, which allowed them to get into it. Like, if an example for me is actually this right here, communicating with other people about this topic. Excuse my hands. I love being able to go out and talk to people, but this has led me to develop about this hobby. So role playing is how I got here, but this has led me into learning skills. This has led me into growing as a person. This has led me into doing a whole bunch of stuff that I am normally genuinely very afraid of doing, because I'm just a I'm a normal person like everybody else. I fear failure. I am worried about success and stuff like that. And it has led me down such a interesting rabbit hole so far. And when it comes to other players, like you have people who go into GTA role playing and they go, wow, I actually really enjoy voice acting. So I want to go out in there and try to actually voice act. I think that's fascinating.
No, totally. And that's one of the things that a number of the people, voice actors that I've had on, have had that connection with gaming in various forms. I mean, Kareem, who's one of my friends who happens to play on my podcast quite regularly, happens to be one of sort of the UK kind of indie audio drama, kind of call him the godfather of UK indie audio, but that's not my term, but I thought it was quite fun. But I first met him when we used to go to role-playing conventions back in the 90s. And to see him now as a very prolific, high-profile voice actor and on some high-class elements, even in appearing in games, he is your go-to if you want a dragon. Here's your go-to if you want an Egyptian with a classic classic British accent.
Mm-hmm.
So, someone like Kareem is fantastic, and just a perfect example of exactly what you're saying is that it's amazing what pops out. But I think also, for me, what popped out of role-playing, particularly because I'm mostly the referee, or DM, whatever you want to call it.
The forever DM.
I am the forever DM. I love it. Absolutely adore it. And it made me a game designer. Because I'm constantly coming up with rule mechanics and systems and processes combined with narrative, combined with challenge, reward, payoff, all of these things which are essential to working out how to design games. And it happened that there was no money in tabletop when I was looking at doing that. Probably isn't very much now. But to get a job doing games, it had to be the video games industry. 30 years later, I'm still there. Well, more or less 30. So I think you're right. There's something about, it is about expression.
Mm-hmm.
It is about identity, but there's something that often emerges from that about intent.
I have a theory as to why role playing is so popular, right? I think that people get into role playing because they have a fantasy in their head. They have something that obviously pulls them to this. And they learn what it means for a character to grow. And by learning what that means, they also grow as a person. Like, that is one of the things I love about the whole community. Again, no matter where it's from, is that when you do this, you are learning how to be something more than yourself and experiencing it. And that contributes to you as a person. And I love that. I'm sorry, I say that a lot, and I'm going to say that a lot throughout my whole life.
Yeah, no, I think it's entirely right. And I think that principle that, you are growing as a person, I think that comes for me, like we said earlier, about the idea of experimenting. Whether it's because you're experimenting with your identity or the way to tell stories, or even if you're intentionally challenging people, you're still experimenting. And every session has instant feedback. That instant feedback is through the other players, whether that's in a MMO style context and the other players are typing, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
The reaction they give to you gives you feedback. The way that they double down into your narrative arc, or they take a tangent and shut your narrative arc down, tells you a story, helps inform you, gives you feedback. And that to me is that is a learning process. And what is play? And there's a guy called Rafe Costa who wrote a book on game design, A Theory of Fun. And in that, he basically talks about how play is learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's nailed it. And, why does every mammal virtually, and even crocodiles, have been tracked as playful? Can you imagine that? We've actually observed crocodiles playing. Think about that. And think about how ancient a lineage crocodiles are. Play has existed for longer than human beings have been on the planet.
Yeah. How do I explain this? How do I say this? I don't think I actually have anything good to say in this response. Because it really is just playing. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Role playing is just playing and having fun with other people. It's like a lot of people think about role playing and they think, oh, it's the people who are not in role playing look in at role playing and go, oh, that's kind of cringy. It's kind of weird. But we all play pretend in some facet of our life. So one of the things I want to answer, at least for myself, with like the podcast and things I'm doing is, why does it seem so odd when literally everyone does it in a different context? Why is it odd to do it with a group of people and not just like with yourself? Like with yourself, you can create whatever narrative you want, right? With if you're playing pretend and you're thinking if you're having an argument in your head, right? That argument in your head can take on any facet that makes you feel better. But if I'm having this pretend argument with you, you can respond in a way that I will not see coming, and it makes me and you a better person for it.
Absolutely. Because if you're doing it on your own, daydreaming on your own, you're not getting challenged, but you're also not getting positively reinforced or course corrected if that thought process is spiraling in the wrong way. To do that against an empty void means that you don't get the support, whether positive or I don't mean negative, but, correcting or positive reinforcement. I think those are fundamentally important factors that come from being social animals, which we are. I think there's also an aspect, you've said something related to what you were saying earlier about, people who aren't identifying as gamers or players looking at this as a kind of weird cringe thing. I mean, one of the reasons is because we have no function related to real life, and that's by design. In fact, there's a book called Homo Ludus by a guy called Hudsinger, who talks about how play has to be separate from your daily life. It can't be paid for. It can't be. You can't earn things from it. And there's a whole debate around what that means. But in principle, what I'm trying to get to with this is it's the fact that it's not part of what's going to have consequences in your real life. The fact that you've got this ability to have allowable consequences, non-permanent consequences, allows us to be playful, allows us to explore, allows us to get the emotional benefits from the process. And I think that's why it might seem cringy to you if you're looking at it cold without understanding what's going on. But that very same thing that might seem cringy to you if you're not one of the in party is exactly what makes that experience joyful.
And you can have, go ahead, I'm sorry. And it's more than just for anybody out there who is, on the outside looking in, you're not going to be able to see like the out of character bonds you make with people over the seriousness, the silliness, the whatever you want of it. And like, I have a friend who I'm in a guild with, and she and I have been very good friends for quite a long time. And because of the way our characters have acted with each other, we ourselves have learned and grown as friends. And like we've had, and we act just like any friends do. We have our disagreements, we have our laughs and stuff like that. Anybody who looks at our relationship from the outside is going to think that is weird, but to us, we're just two people having fun. And I think more people should do that. It's like going to It's going to a TCG shop and sitting down with your friends and playing your favorite TCG game.
Absolutely.
And being able to sit down and say, I have this deck. This deck is XYZ. You are going to get that. But the other people who are just there to look at the comics have no idea what I'm saying.
Yeah. And to me, there's no difference between that and going to a football match or watching something at a bar on a screen. And that can be any kind of football, including the American type. So I don't speak sports, so I was not my field. But the whole idea of being able to be, because you're fantasizing about being one of the team. I mean, I'm being a bit extreme in my description, but from an outside looking in, you could argue that a football fan is a vicarious member of the club, but they're not on the field, they're not running around, they're not kicking the ball, and yet they feel that they're participating in the success or failure of that team by their cheering, even though they're in a bar that might be tens of thousands of miles away from it.
Yeah. Yeah, and like it affects them as a person, right? And the same thing can happen with stories. That's another thing that I think is really cool, like how the story itself can affect the players.
Yeah.
And like of course I've had moments where I try very hard to make sure, or well, I used to. I kind of stopped doing it. I used to try very hard to make sure that like if people felt like they weren't being seen, or if they felt like people like no one was taking the time to like role play with them, I would try to take that time and make them feel welcomed and like I said, seen and stuff like that. And it has happened. One of the reasons I stopped doing it with one group of people is like it happened and something made the whole scene just sort of fall apart. Like the whole thing just completely fell apart.
It happens.
And everybody walked away from it feeling bad. And that, again, the same thing can happen in sports. Like if your team doesn't win, you're going to walk away feeling a little sad, possibly. I mean, and that's okay. Like I have my own favorite sports teams. Do I care if they win every time? No, I just like watching them. I just enjoy experiencing it with my friends.
Well, I know some friends of mine that absolutely care if their team wins or not, and they will be in a complete funk if their team fails. And to me, there is no difference. It's just the source of the connection is different. The narrative that's being told is different. We're still essentially telling stories, whether it's stories about real world people doing physical actions in a sports context with their own rules, or whether it's us sitting there with our dice or our character studies telling our stories with each other and evolving a narrative world around us. Both are equally valuable, and I think both are equally interesting.
You know what I just thought? Thought of, and this will probably never work. I wonder if people who play fantasy football are considered role players. Is that how that works?
I wouldn't say they would consider themselves to be, but I mean, pretty much. I mean, there must be some people who take on the role of manager XYZ when they're doing that. I mean, I suspect that people who own up to that being a role-playing style experience are in the vast minority. But I mean, surely they're going to be putting themselves in the perspective of something.
They're playing a game. I hope they understand that they're just playing a game at that point. I've never played fantasy football. This might make people mad.
I haven't either, but I know a few folks like Miles at Sports Interactive and folks like that do a Sports Interactive. Anyway, Soccer Manager basically, and they are so deeply passionate about the game and the logic. I'm not sure they would necessarily call themselves role players in that sense, although I wouldn't put it past Miles in particular. But the key thing for me is that it's the love of the system. In fact, there was a point in time before World of Warcraft where Championship Manager was the highest source of divorces, or highest cited reason for divorces games.
Wow.
So yeah, it was very often cited. Anyway, bottom line is, I think what we're describing is a spectrum of storytelling, from the like fixed literature style writing of a kind of classic audio drama to the improvised nature of like devised pieces, which I think blurs with our actual plays and the critical roles of this world. I think there's a kind of spectrum there, all the way down to us folks who are just sitting there in our World of Warcraft character, trying to make sure we're actually playing. Or my favorite example is my friend Glyn, who will replay Fallout on a regular basis, and he will take on various characters, one of which is, I think, called Bob. I can't remember. I might be misremembering. Sorry, Glyn, if I've misremembered it. But basically, he has certain rules that he won't wear armor, or I forgot what the rules are, but it's not like he won't wear armor, he won't do this, and he just carries on, and he kind of does the whole thing in character, and that's just him on his own, creating his own story,
and that's perfectly valid. Like do you know the game Mass Effect?
Yes, very much so.
I love Mass Effect. I have played Mass Effect pretty much every year for the last 10 years. I've played it all the way through.
I can't go back to the first one. The control system on the first one for combat is so terrible.
I know. And if it wasn't for the story, if it wasn't for the fact that I wanted to do it specifically for the rest of the series, I probably wouldn't either. But I love being able to go back and experience things in a different way through different characters. Like, I'm never going to be a jerk person in real life. I just can't bring myself to do that. But I don't mind playing a shepherd who's an asshole. You know what I mean?
That's my type too. Now we've now called them types. Now I've now elevated that improv kind of statement into formalized types. So I have to write a paper about it or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, exactly that. The ability to try out a personality that's not me, to explore a narrative. I called you a touchy rather than types because I suspect you're not deliberately trying to provoke other people, which is what I think the type 3s do. But anyway,
right.
So taking the fact we've kind of found this continuity of the importance of storytelling and some of the rules and the kind of processes. Rules is more like guidelines. The ways that we can connect people together, have a sort of intelligent perspective on the way we tell stories we've talked about. So let's come back to your podcast. So if you're enjoying this interview, why not check out this brief trailer from our guest?
Hey everybody, welcome to In and Out of Character, a role players podcast where I, your host, Mr. Island, bring on a guest every single week. 2 now, every Monday and Wednesdays, and we talk about different things that have to do with them and role playing. Normally like to talk about how they get into the role playing, because I find it a fascinating topic.
What is it you're trying to achieve through your podcast?
So this is a sort of like a layered question, and at the top of it, like the most important thing I want to do is I just want to create a place where all of us as role players, all of us who love narrative storytelling and the systems that drive them and all the ins and outs of all that, I want to have a place where we can all sit down and talk and chat about this, because is a strange yet I believe awesome hobby. And we as role players tend to stick in our single areas. Like, if you're a tabletop role player, you tend to just stay as a tabletop role player and you don't branch out because, the other stuff is like, I don't mind role playing at the table with friends, but role playing online in a forum or a chat room, oh, that's kind of cringy. That's kind of weird, right? And I want to explore why that is to people. I want to bring us together. I want to know why people will do one thing, but they won't do another thing. And I want to have us all come together and say, hey, it's okay to go out and explore more. Like, I think people who cosplay would have a lot of fun LARPing, right? Because you're already getting into another character when you cosplay. You're getting into another character when you LARP, and you're making your own stuff and things like that. Take yourself from the LARP into the cosplaying world and go out and meet other people to do that sort of thing. And I believe that cosplaying in itself is a form of role playing, because like I've met so many cosplayers who have said the moment they put on this outfit and they go out, the world changes. They're not the shy person anymore because the character isn't shy. They're not the loud boisterous type because the character that they're currently cosplaying as is the shy type. So they're not going to go out and be loud and boisterous. I think that is awesome. So that's one of the aspects I want to do with it. Another one of the reasons why I am doing what I do is because I genuinely just love talking to people, if that makes any sense.
Of course it does.
I have such a love for getting to know other people, and my greatest fear in all of this is that there will come a time when I can't remember the people I've talked to, and it's already started to happen, and I feel bad about it.
Oh, it's inevitable.
It's gonna suck. It's gonna really suck when I get to that point where I literally just cannot remember dozens of names. But I've met so many awesome people doing this. Like, I've met you. I've met Valanda from Blighthouse Studios. I'm talking to people on the Lucky Dice. I'm talking to... I've met my good friends from the Roleplay Rejects just by going out and saying, I love this hobby. Can I talk to you about it?
I love it. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I was just thinking as you were talking about LARP versus cosplay, I think there must be a massive overlap of LARPers who cosplay, but I think there's the much smaller overlap of cosplayers who LARP.
Mm-hmm.
That's my instinct. I don't know if that's true or not. Somebody tell in the comments. Please tell us what you think.
And I can definitely understand that because like cosplaying is like going out to a convention for like 3 days and showing yourself off, or just like, taking pictures and sharing it with your friends, stuff like that. When you go out to LARP, you might be going out for a while to do physical activity, and not everybody is out. Not everybody is willing to go outside and touch grass. I get it.
But there are multiple types of LARP. The LARP you're describing, the rubber sword LARP, is one part of it. Probably, I'm guessing the slightly larger part, but I've also been involved in the more murder mystery style LARP. I used to write 50 person LARPs that would be played out in 4 hours.
I am going to ask you so much about that.
I'm
going to ask you so much.
So so that's a hint for next time when we switch places and Ireland interviews me, hopefully. But yeah, I think this is the thing, is like the joy of being able to talk. So I started doing this because I wanted to make my game, which was all about kind of creating these short format dilemmas based on a game I designed in the 90s to take to game conventions, so that I could have more people play the game idea, you get a taste of it. And it was such a lovely format that it's now become something where we can use as an actual play. There's an intensity that happens with that, and I think this fits with some of the things we said about earlier with the role of games and role playing in connecting people. That intensity of decision is like how you've strengthen steel in a relationship. It's that intensity, that shared experience is what builds friendships.
Do you mind if I get a little sappy?
Go for it. Be sappy.
One of the reasons why I love roleplay so much is because, and this is something that I've come to appreciate as I've gotten older, as I've gotten, outside of the, like 10 years ago. I mean, my only worry was like paying rent and not caring about anything else, right? Like rent, go home after work, play games. Like that was it. Like role play. But like in the state of today's world, things feel separated. And role playing reminds me, and has continued to remind me in these really hard and difficult days for everybody, when things are just going, that we all still want to be able to sit down and just experience things with each other. And
be human.
Do things with, be human, yes, and do things with each other. And role playing has really sort of kept me sane and everything going on.
Completely agree. Love it. On that note, Ireland, thank you so much for taking the time out with me. I really enjoyed chatting with you. So if anyone wants to find out more about your podcast and what you do, what's the best way they can do that?
You can find my podcast, In and Out of Character, a role player's podcast, on pretty much any podcaster. I don't have a site yet. I do have a YouTube channel. It's called The Core Role Players Guild. You can find it there, where I'll do other things other than the podcast. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure. So there you have it. We've been talking about the deeper elements of what role play is, and how can be a personal experience as much as it can inform any level of storytelling. What I find personally fascinating, I think Alan kind of highlighted a lot of these things, is the way that we can use it to explore ideas and communication and have that challenged by others. And that connection, that challenge, that redirection allows us to improve and try and build deep and meaningful relationships, even with people we've never met or even potentially spoken to in person. And I think that's what the connective tissue for me between looking at somebody role-playing a character in a World of Warcraft is with somebody playing it on a tabletop game to somebody creating a character in a narrative story. And I think that's an incredible way of thinking about it, the function of role-playing to be able to allow us to experiment. And the fact is that, as we've said, it's not just in a game where we do that. Everybody takes on a role and explores it. And we're just being perhaps a little bit more honest about it by applying it through play. On that note, thank you very much. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, share, give us comments. If you don't agree with the way we've done this, then please tell us and we'll try to respond to that. But again, we'll be back soon where we'll talk again about audio storytelling with amazing people who create audio narratives, tabletops, and now the role-playing experiences. And with that, we'll see you next time on the podcast. Thank you.
Bye-bye.